This is Jerry Kieschnick presenting the topic 7 estate planning myths and gift planning tools, or something like that. Today is Friday, the 17th of February in the year of our Lord 2023. We are in room 16 on the campus of Christ Church Lutheran in Phoenix, Arizona, and we're fixing to get it going. Okie dokie. Why didn't everybody say howdy?
Howdy.
There are people here listening to this broadcast. Now, if I put this in the right place in my pocket so I don't press it when I make a gesture, maybe it'll stay on and work, huh? We'll try it. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's right 10:30 on the nose. So we're going to get started. I am Jerry Kieschnick. My wife, Terry, is back in the back, and she loves it when I introduce her to a crowd. She wave at Terry, will you? Wave at Terry. Terry is the bread and butter, the nuts and bolts of our operation. I tell you what, she tells me, stop it. That's what she says, but I got the floor now, so I can say stuff like that, right? Can you all hear me okay back in the back? Sometimes when I start talking kind of quick, I start slipping into my old Texas brogue. I say y'all kind of a lot, but I'll try not to drop my syllables at the end. I'll try to keep on talking so you can all hear everything that we have to say. Well, I'm the guy over here on that side of the screen. I'm the chief executive officer of Legacy Deo, and I'll tell you more about Legacy Deo in a few minutes. Reverend Jay Brown is the guy back in the back who offered his computer for services to be rendered. He serves as a legacy giving ambassador, and you'll hear a few words from him just a little bit later on in our time together. But I want to share with you some important stuff about, well, first of all, a little bit of introduction to Legacy Deo. It's funny when I spell it on the phone, people say deal. Deo? What is that? Well, you probably know that Deo is the Latin word for God. And the bywords, the watchwords, the tagline of Legacy Deo is God's gifts, your legacy. And I'll say a little bit more about that right now. Our legacy from God is who we are and what we have. We don't have anything when we come into this world except what God gives us. That's His legacy to us. And our legacy back to God is what we do with who we are and what He gives us. That could be kind of summarized in the term of stewardship of life. How do we manage our life and how do we manage the possessions that God has entrusted to our care? That's what Legacy Deo was all about. So we started back in 1960 under the name Lutheran Foundation of Texas. Our first gift was a ranch. And here's the true story. There was a family in Texas that had a ranch, and they decided to give it to the church. Actually, they wanted to give it to the Texas district of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And the folks who were in charge of the district at that time kind of got wide-eyed, and they said, a ranch? What are we going to do with a ranch? So 4 men got together, 2 of whom were members of my home congregation. And I didn't know it at the time. I was just a teenager in 1960. But they got together and they formed this corporation called Lutheran Foundation of Texas. So the people had the ranch, gave the ranch, deeded the ranch to the foundation. They said, oh, by the way, you can keep the minerals. We said, cool. And then we sold the ranch and gave the money to the district, to the church. So was everybody happy? Everybody was happy. The people were happy because they got to give something of value to a ministry they valued, the church, the district. Welcome, folks. Come on in. We got a couple of seats right here for you. We saved these just for you folks.
Somebody's notes here?
I don't think so.
No.
Just there we go.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. No problem. You like to make a splash when you come in. I know you.
Yeah, they changed
You got
the
it?
classroom all the way to the other side.
Oh, my goodness.
That we were originally going to.
Are you good to go there?
Yep.
All righty. So the people, the donors, were happy because they got to achieve their objective of giving something of value to a ministry they loved and valued, the district. The district was happy because they didn't have to mess with the ranch, and they got the something of value. They got some significant resources. And the foundation basically at that time was just kind of a liaison, sort of a broker, just to connect the donor and the recipient. Well, that's the way the foundation began, and for a number of years it continued to just rock along. Actually, the board of directors, those four guys, met occasionally, not too often. They'd come to Austin, and they'd meet, and the meeting sort of went like this. With the mineral rights that they had, a check would come in occasionally. So the board meeting would go, did we get the check? Yep. Did we deposit the check? Yep. Let's have coffee or beer or whatever they had in those days. So that was the extent of the ministry, and occasionally somebody would hear about what the foundation had done and they wanted to do something similar, and they'd contact the foundation and found, yeah, we can help you with that. But it just kind of rocked along from 1960 to 1986, quarter of a century. Nothing really was happening significantly. No employees, a couple volunteer chairman of the board, that sort of thing. But no full-time employee until they hired a guy to be the director of development and to work for a part-time executive director. That guy was I. I left the parish ministry and started doing this work in 1986. And since that time, over a number of years, the foundation has grown to the size it is now. And it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to the folks who were running the foundation to, in 2017, 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago, to rebrand ourselves as Legacy Deo. Why is that? Simply because, in my term, Legacy Deo preaches better than Lutheran Foundation of Texas. Lutheran is a good and godly name. We are Lutherans. We're proud of it. Not everybody who is Lutheran. Well, there are people who are not Lutheran who might want our services, and we can provide those services to non-Lutheran people too. We do it all the time. Foundation, sometimes people hear that word and they think Gates Foundation, Clinton Foundation, a bunch of old guys smoking cigars in a smoke-filled room trying to figure out what to do with their billions of dollars. That's not us. We're not like some of the other foundations that exist that are wonderful foundations that are started when a hospital got sold and all of a sudden hundreds of millions of dollars are used to fund that foundation and all they got to do is figure out how to give it away. No. We're a ministry. We try to connect people with the charitable cause that they want to support, especially in non-traditional ways. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Texas, we serve people in 32 different states, not just Texas. So with Texas in our name, there were people in other states who automatically just assumed that we couldn't help them, so they never even called. Well, we get some contacts. We don't aggressively market outside the state of Texas, but we do receive requests from people in different states, and we are able to help them as long as we don't solicit their work. And that's because we're not selling any securities, we don't sell life insurance, we don't sell mutual funds, we don't sell anything. We just help people make gifts. Our mission is to inspire giving that impacts life forever. We're a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation. How are we funded? Three different ways. One is a reasonable administrative fee that we charge to every account that we manage that has any money in it that requires management and investment and distribution. That's the work we do, and we charge an administrative fee. Revenue for undesignated endowment. Some people like the work we do, and they leave money for us in a planned gift. It could be in an estate, it could be a will, it could be a bequest, it could be an insurance policy. We receive dollars from time to time from donors who love the work we do. And we invest that money, that's an endowment, we invest that money and use the revenue to fund our operation. Also contributions from supportive donors. We get cash contributions or we get stock contributions. We get contributions from people who just say, you helped me do some stuff, we want to help you also, so we'll give you a gift to make that possible. So, what does Legacy Deo do? We do a number of things. Looks like that screen's got some markings on it. Is that distracting to you, or can you live with that? You didn't even notice it until I pointed it out, I bet, huh? It's not on the slide, it's on the screen. You got that? Can you live with that okay? All right, good deal. Congregational and organizational endowments, well, that's a big part of what we do. I'll tell you how many accounts we manage in a minute, but congregations, we find that they have some money left over, maybe especially post-COVID. And if they had that money invested in a bank account drawing 0.03% interest, somebody says, is that the best we can do? And the answer is no, it's not the best you can do. So then they say, what about, I hear about endowments. What is that? So we go and help people understand what endowments are. Organizations also, not just congregations, but parachurch organizations, schools, universities, the district, the synod, the seminaries, all of those are organizations that have endowments with our organization. We serve as trustee for more than 400 fiduciary accounts. Fiduciary is simply an important word. Comes from the Latin word fides, which means faith, and it's faithfulness. Fiduciary responsibility, we have a faithful responsibility to take care of the resources entrusted to our care. 400 accounts. Over 300 of those are endowments. So that's the bulk of what we do. The rest of them are the kinds of instruments I'll tell you about in just a few minutes. We provide estate planning, consultation, and assistance. Notice the word advice is not there. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. We have an accountant on our staff, a CPA, but he doesn't give estate planning advice. That's left to the personal, legal, and financial representative of the individual people who contact us for assistance. So we'll say to a person, so what do you have? And what do you want to do with what you have? Well, I'm not sure. What are the options? And we'll tell him what the options are. And then he'll pick, well, I think I like this one right here. Tell me more about that. So that's the deal. We provide that kind of consultation and assistance. Executor of individual estates. There are people who either have nobody else. There are people who are all alone in the world, and there's nobody they know that they don't want to go to a trust department of a bank. They know that's going to cost them a bunch of bucks to do that. They don't have any close. The close friends are already gone. In many cases, all their family members are gone. So if they contact us and they say, the executor of our estate, the answer is yes. We are qualified and capable. It's in our bylaws. According to the trust code, we qualify to serve. I served as an executor of this. It's not something we do every day, all day, but it's something that we do. I did one a couple of years ago for an 86-year-old man who was never married, had no children. He had 7 siblings, and they were all dead and gone. And he had, I think, 8 nephews and nieces. But he didn't want to pick one of those. He didn't know which one to pick, so he picked us years ago. And we probated his estate and distributed the money. Some of it went to his nephews and nieces. A bunch of it went to the church extension fund. Some of it went to Concordia University in Austin. And we did the work of probating the estate, which is not all that difficult. But it takes time, and it takes work. It has to be done. Power of attorney for finance and a power of attorney for healthcare. We don't do those very often, but we do. We are named as power of attorney for finance in a couple of cases. People, again, we're all alone in the world, didn't know who to contact or who to ask to carry out that responsibility. We try to encourage people to find individuals, whether they're close friends or relatives, to serve in those capacities, but we will do it if they can't find anybody else. Special charitable gifts. I'm going to name these right now, and I'll try to describe them in general, but a little bit later on I'll get into a little bit more detail about what each of them does. What each does. Did I get that grammatical construct correct? Family endowment funds. What is that? That means that if a family wants to do an endowment fund in loving memory of grandpa and grandma, or mom and dad, or a favorite great uncle or whatever, then they will sometimes name that endowment fund in loving memory of that loved one, and they will designate, then the family will designate the proceeds to go to whatever charitable cause they pick. It could be their alma mater. It could be a Concordia University for scholarships. It could be their the congregation of their parents or whatever it is that they want to do. And it could be multiple recipients, beneficiaries. So families can do that as well. Charitable gift annuities, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Charitable lead trust, that's a cool thing. Donor advised funds, I'll tell you a lot about that in a few minutes. Special non-cash gift facilitation. So it says what, it means just what it says. We can, well, I'll tell you later on some of the ways that people can give and some of the non-cash ways to make gifts. But there it is right there. More information will be provided later about those topics. So there are a lot of terms that we throw around in this business, and those terms are gift planning, planned giving, current giving, deferred giving, and the question is, what does all that mean? So I'm going to assume that nobody in here knows anything about those topics, and I'm going to just lay it out real quickly, not to dumb it down, because you're smart people. I can tell by looking at you, you're smart people.
Well, they are. Dumb it down for me.
Dumb it down for you. Okay, these people are okay, but for you, I'll do it. So the gift planning basics are these. I kind of categorize them. Current gifts. That means you plan it now and you give it now. Pretty simple. A future gift means you plan it now and you give it later. It's also called a deferred gift or a planned gift. What to give, how to give, and why to give. I think those are all important aspects of the whole deal with respect to giving, especially planned giving. What to give: cash, stocks, life insurance, retirement accounts, valuable collections, valuable jewelry, valuable art. If you can think of anything else that's valuable, that may be, it's something that could be liquidated. What does that mean? Sold and turned into cash. Because if it's going to be of use or value to the recipient, in some cases it can be given in the form in which it exists currently, like jewelry, valuable jewelry. My dear wife loves jewelry. She has a little bit of jewelry. Some of it is very valuable. The stuff that's not very valuable financially is valuable to this lady's heart, because it came from people that she knows and loves, or she purchased it on special occasions, or she received it as a gift from somebody like maybe her husband or one of her kids or grandkids. So a gift like that may need to stay in its current form. You don't need to liquidate everything that's given. It can stay in its current existence. But most of the gifts that are passed along are liquefiable. They can be turned into cash, which is pretty much a universal commodity. And real estate. We receive and help people make gifts of real estate. How to give. Personal check. Pretty easy. Do you write any checks anymore? You know, the only checks I write, there are two kinds of checks that I write. Number one, Terry and I write special end of year and during the year charitable gifts. We don't any longer write checks that go into the offering plate at our church. We started years ago doing that electronically. We use our bank, and our bank every Wednesday sends a check to our church for the same amount every stinking week. So if we're traveling, like is often the case, our gift is already there. The problem was when we started doing that, I said, honey, how am I going to deal with the Lutheran guilt of seeing the offering place pass in front of me and looking at it and just passing it down the line? That doesn't feel right. So I said, I can fix that. So we still get the box of offering envelopes. And every Sunday that we're there, I'll pull out one, or if we've been gone 3 Sundays, I'll pull out 4. 3 for the Sundays we were gone and 1 for this Sunday. And I'll fill in the amount, and I'll check, and I'll put ELEC, electronic. Then I'll check the general fund. I'll put that in the offering plate when it goes by. And my Lutheran guilt is gone. Not there. It's cool away. So that's one way. That's one time we give checks. So we give to other organizations, especially the end of year, but also sometimes during the year. Memorials. We like to do memorials in loving memory of people who pass away. And I got 2 more to add to our list, sweetheart, when we get home. Last year we did 77 memorials. when you get to be my age, people start dying around you. You know what I mean? You'll know that. So that's one. The other thing that we use checks for is, that I use checks for, is family gifts. On every person's birthday in our family, I give them $10 a year for however old they are. And at Christmas time, it's a fixed amount for each person. So I write checks for family on those birthday and Christmas events. Those are the only two times I really write checks. Everything else is done electronically. It's cool. Donor advised fund. Well, what's a donor advised fund? Well, I'm going to tell you about that a little bit later on. Credit card or debit card, beneficiary designation form, bank accounts, auto pay feature, transfer stocks to a favorite charity, last will and testament or living trust. How to give, and some more. Lifetime endowment, testamentary endowment. What's the difference between those two? A lifetime endowment, you do an endowment while you're still living. A few years ago, Terry and I had some extra money. We started an endowment. It's called the least of these. Matthew 25. And as much as you've done this to the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. And the least of these supports people, especially children, who are homeless, abused, chronically ill, hungry, those kinds of things. And all the organizations we support through that endowment are non-Lutheran. Why is that? Because I think there's some private or public 501c3 organizations that do, frankly, a much better job with lower overhead than some of our Lutheran ministries do. Those organizations are targeted, they're specifically focused, like Feed My Starving Children. I mean, that's a great organization. There are other organizations like that are supported by that. That's a lifetime endowment. We started it during our lifetime, and our estate plan adds some more money to it at a certain point in time after both of us are dead and gone. IRA, testamentary endowment, what is that? Well, that's an endowment that's planned and written in a last will and testament. That's where the word testamentary comes from. It's set up in the will, but it doesn't come into being until the circumstances of the will happen. And in our case, it would be after both of us are dead and gone, and after a number of years have passed, when our children receive some benefit from our estate. I'll get into that detail if you want me to. At that point, then, an endowment would be begun that would do whatever we want the endowment to do, as stipulated in our last will and testament. So you can do an endowment right now if you have the money that you want to use to start an endowment, or you can simply plan for it in your estate plan. IRA required minimum distribution. More detail about that in a minute. That is a really cool way to make gifts. A variety of planned gifts that provide tax relief and financial benefits for you, your spouse, your family, and your favorite charity. All these things that I've named, the how to give, there's a variety of ways to make those gifts now. The way that you give those gifts later, those are all designed to do a lot of things, to accomplish a lot of objectives. You know, when we get to those individual examples, I'll show you what those benefits are. Why to give? Appreciation for blessings received. Terry and I have been blessed and burdened to visit many third world countries in our 57 years together, especially the last 20 during our national ministry and with the Synod. And if you go to a third world country, and I expect some of you have been at third world countries, you understand how blessed we are. Sometimes we gripe and complain about how poor we are, or about the price of a dozen eggs today, which is ridiculous, is it not? The reality is we are still hugely blessed, and we are thankful to the good Lord for those blessings. Passion for meeting human need. I described human need just a minute ago in the endowment that we started. We know that there are a lot of people who have great needs. And when we were in Lagos, Nigeria one time, a city of, I think, 20 million people, abject poverty everywhere you look. And Terry wasn't on the trip to India. I took a trip to India. And you go to Calcutta, any of those huge, huge cities, there's just everywhere you look, there's poverty. And the way I describe it is, there is just, I don't see any humanly possible way to address the abject, widespread poverty in those kinds of places. It's just so pervasive. So there's a passion for human need that wells up within me and within many people as they try to figure out, now, how can we do that Matthew 25 thing? Do we do it just to our neighbor next door, or can we do it in a broader, more universal way? Response to the love of Jesus. When we stop and think about what Jesus gave to us and for us, good Lord, what in the world? How can I respond with who I am and what I have? That's that second or third slide. Who we are and what we have, what we do with who we are and what we have. That's our legacy back to God. Love for the mission of God. The mission for all Christians is to make known the love of Christ by word and deed. This is what our church body says. Within our churches, communities, and the world. That's the purpose of our church body. It's the purpose of individuals in our church body. And concern for the eternal future of human beings. And I think we get to the point sometimes where we just sort of glaze over the concept of heaven and hell. And I think there's sometimes when it really doesn't register in our minds and in our decisions and in our actions that there is, unless the Holy Scripture and the good Lord and everybody else is lying about the existence of eternal perdition, we happen to believe there really is a hell. And concern for people's eternal future is what motivates us. Why? Why do we give that concern? And the awareness of being sent. You know, when I was a kid, I didn't have any idea why I was in the world. Well, what does a kid know when he's young? Why? You don't even think about the meaning of life and about what's the purpose of life and what's my purpose in life. But I've come to realize that, you know, that passage in, I think it's 2 Corinthians, that you are ambassadors for Christ. It's as if God were making his appeal to the world through us, be reconciled to God. So that's why we're here. And Luther said that in his concept theology of vocation. What's the vocation is all about? It's all about serving God no matter what we do, even slopping hogs. Do that to the glory of God. I've slopped hogs. I didn't feel like it was to the glory of God when I was slopping, I'm telling you. Well, there it is, 2 Corinthians 5, verse 20. We are Christ's ambassadors. So here's a favorite slide of mine. To whom will your assets someday be distributed? There's only 3 possible recipients. Here's the first one. I love this picture. It depicts what we call a nuclear family, right? There's a daddy and a mama and a couple kids. So family, obviously, are people to whom some of our assets someday might be distributed. Did you notice also in this picture there's this dog? So here's a true story. I went to Texas A&M University. I got to take my jacket off because I'm getting warm. Will that offend you if I do that? If so, suck it up, please. So I went to Texas A&M University and I enrolled. I was accepted into vet school and the School of Veterinary Medicine, but I ended up flunking a course in embryology the first year I was in, so I had to go out. But the professor that failed me was kicked off the faculty for incompetence. He really was. But I deserved to fail the course. But so there was a lady some years later who had a dog, and she loved that dog and just couldn't stand the thought of that dog being put down when she passed away. So she gave a significant sum of money to the School of Veterinary Medicine and said, would you build a house? So they built the Stevenson House. Her name was Stevenson. They built the Stevenson House, and it's right there on the campus of the College of Veterinary Medicine in College Station, Texas. And you go there, we walked through it a couple of years ago. Walk in there, and it's a house. It's a 3-bedroom house, a couple of baths, and a family room and a dining room. It's a house. And you see these dogs in the great room. They're kind of hanging around on bean bags, looking at the widescreen TV that fills up half the wall, watching some stinking program. And then so there were only 14 animals in the Stevenson house the day we were there. So she set this up, and the School of Veterinary Medicine set it up so that you, ma'am, Janet, if Jack and Janet have this wonderful pet, that they just can't stand the thought of that pet not having somebody to care for it, him or her, when these people are gone, for the modest sum of $50,000. You can have a place for your pet in the Stevenson house where that pet will be able to live out its natural life until it passes away. Then it'll be cremated, and its ashes will be put in a really nice walnut box carved with the name of the pet and the date of its birth and the date of its death, and it'll appear right there in the dining room in the cabinet that shows all the other animals, the pets that have been deceased. You think I'm making this up? The Stevenson House now has an endowment of $20 million to keep it going. True story. So, people and pets are one possible recipient for our assets. Charity. Charitable organizations. A lot of charitable organizations receive gifts upon the death of people who love those charitable organizations. And thirdly, is that cool or what? I want to do that again. Watch this. Uncle Sam, he just reaches right out.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, you can have it.
That's cool. The true story, the truth of the matter is that Uncle Sam is right now very generous about saying it wants to receive something from your estate when you pass away. You probably know that there is such a thing as an estate tax, also called the death tax. Simply means when you pass away, if you have more than a certain number of assets, then everything above that is taxed at a certain level, and that tax goes to the federal government. Well, the generous part right now is that that level is pretty high. That level allows you, sir, to have $12 million in your personal, that belong to you.
Well, thank you.
And are you married?
Oh, yeah.
Your wife. This is not your wife here. It's your granddaughter here, right? Is that right? Whoever this lady is, if this were your wife, she would also have $12 million. Actually, $12,060,000. That would be exempt from estate tax, death tax. So together, if you and your wife planned it properly, you would be able to have a joint estate of $24 million before you have any estate or death tax on it. If anybody here has that problem, let me know. I think I can help you. Well, that number is set by Congress, and it can rise or fall depending upon the will of the legislature. My sense is that the legislators themselves probably have a little vested interest, because generally speaking, they tend to be a little bit higher than average wealth. So they want to be sure that not too many of their dollars are going to have to go to Uncle Sam as well. But that number could go up or it could go down. Don't know. So those are the three possible recipients of your assets. So now we get to one of the advertised topics of today, and that's 7 estate planning myths. What's a myth? A myth is something that people believe is true, but in fact it's not. We have some brochures, by the way. Do we have some brochures? Yes. Some estate planning myth brochures. So all these things are in that brochure. You don't have to, therefore, take copious notes if you don't want to. If you want to, go ahead. Myth number 1, I'm not wealthy enough to consider planned giving. This lady looks like she's not a very wealthy person. Can't judge a book by its cover, but she doesn't look like she doesn't think she's wealthy enough to plan an estate. But the reality is, regardless of the estate, it's God's gift to you. You know that passage in Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, where the master gives certain amounts of resources to 3 different folks, 5, 2, and 1, and the master goes away. He says, invest that, take care of it while I'm gone. When he comes back, the guy with 5 says, I got 10 for you. Well done, good and faithful servant. The guy with 2 says, I doubled it. Well done, good and faithful servant. The guy with 1 said, I knew you were a tough hombre. I dug a hole in the ground. I buried it, and I kept it safe for you. Here it is, that 1 talent that you gave me. Now here's back to you. You wicked and lazy, slothful servant. And the words that always perturb me is that the master tells his other servants to throw that servant out into the outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Those are words that describe eternal hellfire. I hope that Jesus was using that metaphor just to impress upon those people the importance of the topic. I don't believe, based on other portions of Scripture, that a person dies and goes to hell because he's not a good steward. It's by grace through faith in Christ that saves us eternally. We know that. Nonetheless, these are words that Jesus himself told in this parable, so it's important. Myth number 2, our estate plan was completed several years ago. We ought to be okay. I think this picture was maybe, what do you think, taken in the 50s? 60s? What do you guess? I don't know. Long time ago. Look at that collar. Yeah. Cool. The hat. Sharp. So the fact of the matter is, estate planning is an ongoing and flexible process. I talk to people all the time. I say, do you have a will? Yeah, I do. But you know where it is? George? You know where our will is? Martha, I thought you knew where everything was. When did we write that will? It's about 35 years ago, I believe. So I usually about that time say, has anything in your life changed in the last 35 years? Yeah, we've had kids and we've got grandkids that we didn't have when we wrote that will. How about your assets? Did you have any? Did those people in 1950 have anything? When Terry and I got married, we didn't have nothing. We didn't have nothing. We had nothing. We paid $20 a night for our honeymoon at the Stagecoach Inn in Salado, Texas, and that was 20% of my monthly salary. I was making $200 a month. We didn't have anything. We're not rich now, but we're not poor now either. The good Lord has changed the assets over which we have some responsibility, and probably the same is true of you. Myth number 3, I'm too young to think or talk about death and dying. Maybe I'll be ready for that someday, but not right now. Right now, I'm shooting a selfie, and I'm going to put it on Facebook so everybody knows how young and strong and virile I am. The fact, God said to the rich fool, you remember that rich fool who had all the crops? He said, my barns are not big enough. I'm going to tear them down, build new barns so I can take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Well, God said, you fool, this very night your life will be required of you. Then who will own what you have accumulated? Terry received a text message and a phone call yesterday late afternoon from her best friend in the world, a girl, lady that she grew up with. Terry grew up with this lady. They have a daughter. She and her husband have a daughter. How old is Julie? 30-something? 40? 50? You know, we're all older than we think, right? Well, Julie's had physical problems for years, and Julie's in hospice care now. So Mother and Daddy are on their way to Albuquerque to spend time, whatever time is left, for Julie. And Julie's 50-something years old. And, we hear about people all the time who pass away before their time. We don't have a lease on life. We don't know how long we have to live. When COVID hit, I learned the beauty of working from home. I still do quite a bit of work from home or on the road. And one time I was sitting there and I was kind of caught up and I said, what should I be doing? And I tell people all the time they should plan their estate. They should be sure and update their will. They should do a funeral plan. I haven't done that myself. I started it one day, but I didn't finish it. I pulled it up and I almost finished it. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you haven't done that, that's a weird kind of a thing. Why is it weird? It was weird for me because it brought me face to face with the reality that someday some people that I know and love, if they're still alive, are going to be gathered in a place, a sanctuary, a Lutheran church, to thank God for the life of this old boy. So it's difficult. It's one of those things that's so easy to put off and procrastinate on, but it's a great thing because, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's a great thing to do those kinds of plans because you don't know how long the good Lord's going to let us live here. Number 4, if I don't have a will, my family will be able to figure it out. I think I'm going to go to the golf course. Nice guy. If you don't have a will, the fact is the probate judge will appoint an administrator, and will that person who doesn't know you or your family carry out your wishes? This is a somber-looking fellow. He's dressed in a 3-piece suit. He's got a portfolio in his hand, and his meter is running. Yep. And his meter will require several $100s per hour to do the work that the guy that went to the golf course could have done to save his estate and thus his family and his charity a whole bunch of money. Myth number 5, charitable estate planning advisors only want me to include the church in my plan, not my family. I don't get that complaint very much, or that concern, because this is the truth. The Bible says if anyone does not provide for his relatives, especially members of his household, he's denied the faith. And it's worse than an unbeliever. It's a different context that passage was written, but it's true for planned giving as well. So I always say when I'm talking to people, what about your family? How are you going to remember your family? And sometimes the people know exactly what they want to do and how much they want to leave their family, and sometimes they don't know. I was working with a couple one time. Leon was 80 years old when they first found me, and Carol was 82. They had just gotten married to each other, 80 and 82, just got married. Well, Leon, that was his first marriage. He had gone through the first 8 decades of his life with no spouse. But he found Carol and fell madly in love with her. Well, Carol had been married before. Her first husband died, and she had 2 kids. She had, they called me after I made a presentation kind of like this, and they said, "Can you help us?" I said, "I don't know, let's talk." So I went over to see them, and I said, "Tell me about your children." And Carol said, "Well, I've got a daughter who's in her 60s, low 60s, and she's an attorney. She's a very successful attorney. And I don't know if I want to leave her anything or not. She got more money than I do. I don't want to leave her anything. And my son is a little bit younger. He's a disabled veteran, retired, and he gets money from the Veterans Department, IRS, from the federal government. But he's not a good manager of his money, and he's always, every month, he'll call me and say, "Mom, I need $500. So I'll write a check for $500. And she said, "I don't know what's going to happen when I'm gone, and I'm not there to write any more checks." So we talked a little bit about that whole thing, and finally, after a couple of visits, I said, "I think you need to go see a lawyer. Do you have a lawyer?" "No." I said, "Well, why don't you find one and let me know? If you want me to come, I'll come." So they called and said, "We've got an appointment with Sandra, the lawyer. Will you come with us?" I said, "Sure." We went to Sandra's office and met. She talked for a while, and she said to me, "Now let's talk about your kids, Carol. I understand that you may not want to leave anything to your daughter." And she said, "Yeah, that's what I'm kind of thinking." And Sandra, the lawyer, said to me, "Dr. Kieschnick, what do you think about that?" "Oh, thanks for putting me on the spot." I said, "Well, like I told Carol when we were meeting together, I think she should seriously consider leaving something for her daughter, something significant, not just $1.95. Why? Because when Carol passes away, the daughter, who is an attorney, or even if she's not, is going to read that will, and she's going to say, "I'm not in the will. I thought my mother loved me." So just as an affirmation of your love for your child, I encourage you to leave something there. Now, your daughter is a smart lady. She's a lawyer. If she doesn't need that money, she'll figure out what to do with it. She'll either spend it, or she'll give it to a charitable cause, or she'll keep it so that she can help out her brother who might need some help. She'll figure it out, but at least she will know that you did love her. Then I said, "Sandra, I'm not sure what to do with the son." She said, "I have an idea." She said, "Let's do a special needs trust." And I said, "Tell us about what that is." So in Carol's will, there's a provision that says when Carol passes away, if Leon passes before Carol, or if he's still living when Carol dies, makes no difference. When Carol dies, $100,000 from Carol's assets will go to fund a special needs trust for the son. How's it work? She named us, Legacy Deo, as the trustee of that trust. So when Carol dies, the executor, we're also the executor. The executor will put $100,000 into a special needs trust. We'll invest it. We'll manage it. The son will know that we have the money that his mother set aside for him. If he gets to the point where he needs something and calls us and said, "I need $500 for this thing," we have the duty, the fiduciary responsibility to say, "Can you get that money from the federal government, or from the Veterans Benefits, or from the IRS?" And if he says yes, then we say, "Well, the trust that we're responsible for managing on your behalf says you need to get it from that source, not from us." If he says no, or "I can only get part of it," then we say, "Okay, then if it's a legitimate request, then we will write a check for whatever that amount is from the trust." And when he passes away, whatever's left in the trust then goes from that trust into an endowment that Carol and Leon have set up to honor their congregation and a couple of other charitable organizations. So what does all that mean? It simply means that there are ways to provide for family that are different than, a little bit more complicated, but not terribly complicated, but different from a simple bequest, where the deceased lays a sum of money in the hands of the loved one. Myth number 6. No need to make a list of what I own. My family will be able to find it all. This is one of the biggest transgressions a lot of people make. And here's his wife pulling her hair out on the phone to that guy with the 3-piece suit, charging a bunch of money to try to figure out what George had and where it was. Identifying and locating accounts, investments, retirement plans is labor intensive, increases probate cost. Even the estate that I mentioned a while ago that I probated a couple of years ago, that man had a list, but the list was 40 years old. So he had money spread out in 5 different accounts, because you remember the FDIC insurance that would insure up to $100,000 per institution? Well, he had $500,000 and he 5 different banks. Well, in that 40-year period of time, he had terminated a couple of those accounts and done something. He bought a farm with some of that money. But he didn't have that in his list, so I had to go to all 5 banks. I was told by 3 of them, no, that account was closed 30 years ago. Oh, okay. So even if you have a list to go from, it's not always certain that that's an up-to-date list. But if you have no list at all, what does the executor do? Where does he or she start? You go through the file cabinet. You go through the stack of letters. You go through grocery bags of bank account statements that are kept sometimes by people for decades, and there's no filing system. If you've been to the house that I'm thinking about, I'm picturing in my mind, they're all over the place. So one of the things that I've done, and I keep it up fairly regular to date, I have on my computer a list of our assets. What does it include? It includes the place where the deed for our home is located, the title for our cars, our IRAs, our 401ks, the annuities that we have, the bank account that we have. All those things are listed by name of the manager, by the address, the account number, the phone number, the current balance. All those sorts of things are there in the book, so that when the good Lord calls me home, our daughter, who's going to be our executor, my executor, well, Terry will be the executor, but Angie will do the work. They'll know where to start. That's a good thing to do. And who knows better than you know what you have? Oh, password. Does your spouse know your computer password? If not, why not? There's stuff in my life is in my computer. Terry knows where to find the password. She couldn't tell it to you now if her life depended on it, but she knows where to find it. Right, sweetheart? Yes. It's too depressing. Here's the myth, number 7. Too depressing, like I said a while ago, to make plans for my funeral service. I'll let my kids make those decisions. So, what do the kids know about what you want your funeral to be like? The biggest question is, what do your kids know about how you want your remains to be handled? Do you want them to be buried, or do you want them to be cremated? Have you made that decision? Does anybody else know? Because if nobody else knows, and all of a sudden you're gone, and your spouse or your kids or your grandkids are left to make the decision, and one of them says, I remember the old man saying that he didn't want to spend $15,000 or $20,000 on his funeral, so that means must mean he wants to be cremated. The other one says, over my dead body, I talked to Daddy one time and he said, don't you burn my body. So all of a sudden you got the surviving relatives at loggerheads because Daddy didn't take the time to put in writing what he really wants to happen to his remains. So the fact is, making advanced plans relieves loved ones of that burden, allows them to thank God for your life and home going to heaven. I have more families who experience a death say, I thank the Lord that Daddy or Mama made those plans and we don't have to. All we have to do is grieve, which is enough in itself. Well, how are we doing? Are you guys okay? Huh? You need a stretch break, or you okay? You going to stand up and stretch? All right, that was a pretty quick stretch break. All right. Is it warm in here or is it just me? Is it warm? Anybody know how to fix that? Anybody see a thermostat on the wall? We could just open that door. The old-fashioned way. There you go. Thank you, Jay. You going to hold it open? Maybe put a chair in front of it or something? If it gets too cool now, y'all holler. All right, so here's a little primer on commonly used plan giving or gift planning. Those terms are used interchangeably, tools. Here's the first one I want to talk about. What's the order? Why the order? Well, probably the order of simplicity and effectiveness. That's probably what I would say. So number one, required minimum distributions. You don't have to raise your hand, but is there anybody in this room who is now over 72 years of age? I'd raise my hand. I'm way over 72 years of age. Now, until a couple years ago, you had to only be 70 and 1/2. Now it's 72, and next year, maybe it's this year, 2023, you have to be 73 before the government says, okay, bucko, you've been setting this money aside for years without paying any taxes on it. It's time to start paying some taxes. So we're going to require you, I'm pointing at that dude back in the back, not because he's 73 years old, because he's got white. Only 71. Well, I saw the white in your beard. Actually, in 2033, it'll be 75. It won't help you by then, but... So the required minimum distribution is a small portion of whatever a person has in the IRA or qualified retirement plan that's not been taxed. It starts around 5% of the amount you have in those accounts, and you have to take that out. If you don't take it out every year, then there's a penalty, 50% penalty, as much as 50%. I'm sorry? The penalty is coming down, and it depends on the circumstances of the reason for not paying it. But still, it's a penalty, and you want to take the required minimum distribution. So if you don't have a need, there are people who say, I've got other retirement plans, I've got other resources, I really don't need. What do I do with that RMD? I don't need it. Well, it's a great way to make a gift. I talked with a retired pastor the other day who's got some resources, and he says, my wife and I use our RMD to make our annual gift to our congregation. It's wonderful. It becomes, when it goes from the manager of the account straight to the charity, it becomes a QCD. It's no longer an RMD, it's a QCD. Qualified Charitable Distribution. What does that mean? It means that if you want to do that, you call the manager of your account and you say, this year don't send the check to me, send it to Zion Lutheran Church in Wallenburg, Texas. Okay, we'll do that. So that bypasses me, and therefore it doesn't have to be listed as part of my adjusted gross income. It goes to the church. May I also deduct that as a charitable gift? No, that would be double dipping. If you take it as an RMD, cash that check, and then write that check to your church, then you declare it as income, but you also declare it as a charitable gift if you itemize your deductions. Make sense? So that's a great way to make a gift. Charitable RMDs. Number two, beneficiary designation and payable on death. Any kind of financial account a person has, if it's a bank account, a life insurance policy, an IRA, a 401k, any of those accounts will always ask, who is your primary beneficiary? And you list your primary. What does that mean? That means the first one who gets what's in that account when you pass away. That's the primary beneficiary. You have more than one primary beneficiary? That's fine. 50% to this person, 50% to that person, or 10% to each of these 10 people. So what does that mean? It means when you pass away, the primary beneficiary or beneficiaries gets a check according to the percentage of the account that's listed as going to that primary beneficiary. Secondary beneficiary is also to be designated. What does that mean? That means if the primary beneficiary is dead and gone, or says, no, I don't want that money, declines to receive that money, some people might do that, then the money goes to the secondary beneficiary, Again, you list the percentage of your estate that you want to go to each of the secondary beneficiaries. Why is that a good idea? It's a good idea because when you pass away, what's in that account that's been designated to go to a beneficiary doesn't have to be probated. You take, if you're the independent executor of somebody's estate, you need to get a death certificate to prove that that person really is dead, and to prove that you're really the person that's supposed to be the executor of the estate. And with that document, you get a document from the judge that says, okay, you're the right one to take care of this deceased person's estate. Then you contact the manager of that account, the life insurance policy, the 401k, whatever it is, and say, George passed away. I'm his executor. Would you please execute the beneficiary designation request that he had on file? The person in charge of that account will look at it and say, yep, looks like George is dead. Yep, looks like Joe is going to be the executor. And Joe says that George, and it says right here in George's account, primary beneficiaries, so the check goes straight to the primary beneficiaries, and it bypasses the probate process. It's really cool. And how much does it cost to designate your beneficiaries? Maybe a postage stamp if you don't do it online. But you can do it online. Just go to the account, sign on to the account, go to the beneficiary designation form. You can change it. If the person that you've already listed as the primary beneficiary is dead and gone, or all of a sudden turns out to be a jerk, and you don't want any money to go to that jerk, change the beneficiary designation. Why is that important? You don't have to change your stinking will. You can do that without a lawyer. It doesn't cost you anything. Easy, simple. Number 3, last will and testament. That's an important document. Many people have a last will. More people don't have a will than those that have it. There are a lot of people in our world who don't have a last will and testament. So what does a last will and testament do? When a person dies, if whatever is designated for beneficiary, that goes. If there's a testamentary instrument of some kind in the last will and testament, then the executor takes care of that. But what happens when a person dies is that the executor does just what I said a minute ago, goes to the courthouse with a death certificate, gets proof from the judge, from the court. It's called letters testamentary. It's only one piece of paper. I don't know why they call it plural. Letters testamentary. So what does that mean? That means that I've been shown and approved by the judge that I'm the guy who's supposed to execute and probate the estate of this man right here, Mr. Bodling, August Bodling. He's dead and gone. He said, you're supposed to do it. Here it is, Mr. Judge. I'm the one. So that gives me the opportunity, the responsibility to find out what August had and to see in his will who's supposed to get it, and to consolidate all the accounts, bring all those accounts together. If they're in bank accounts, like some of his money was, I go to the bank and I say, here's my letters testamentary, here's Mr. Bodling's will, here's what he wants to do. Would you please write a check to Legacy Deo, because we set up a separate account in Legacy Deo's bookkeeping for the estate of Mr. Bodling. So I got a cashier's check from each of the banks where he still had some money, put those back to the office, got a separate account set up. Then I had to go to life insurance policy, find that company, get the check, because he did not have that designated. He just had it designated to his estate, so it came through his estate. And so all of those assets have to be collected and put together in one spot and accounted for. The executor has to submit to the judge a list of claims and assets of the estate. All the assets that are there have to be listed. What's the value of each of those assets? That has to be filed with the court. And also the executor has to find out, who did Mr. Bodling still owe? In most cases, it's a pharmacy. It's probably a doctor or 2 or 10, possibly a hospital, a utility bill or 5. any kind of outstanding debt, if there were a mortgage on a home or indebtedness on an automobile, any kind of debt would have to be liquidated, paid for by what? By the assets of the estate that have been collected by the executor. When all that has been done, then what's left is called the rest, residue, and remainder of the estate. That, lawyers like to use three words to describe one reality, right? Rest, residue, and remainder. So the will say what happens to the rest, residue, and remainder. The will usually says first, before the rest, residue, and remainder are distributed, after all taxes, all debts, all claims against the estate have been satisfied, then Susie gets 10%, Joe gets 20%, and the church gets this all depends upon what the will says. So that's what a last will and testament does. It's an important document because it's intended to cover the waterfront. You don't have to list every specific asset that you have in the will. You just have a will that describes what the executor is supposed to do with your assets. Who does a will? Well, in Texas, a holographic will is legal. What does that mean? It means a person can write the will himself or herself. The law in the state of Texas says it must be written in handwriting. It cannot be written on a computer or on a typewriter. It's got to be in the person's own handwriting and signed. It does not necessarily need to be notarized. A regular will does need to be notarized and witnessed by either 2 or 3 people, depending on which state you're in. So a holographic will is something that people can do themselves without paying money to an attorney. Is that a good thing? Well, it could be if the person has a simple estate and a non-complicated set of recipients, beneficiaries of the will. It can be problematic in some cases if there are certain circumstances that really need some legal guidance. It can cost more than is saved if a person writes a holographic will and misses some important feature of his or her estate that really needs to be taken care of by a provision in the last will and testament. So we always advise people, if you're going to have a will, if you insist on writing it yourself, you do it at your own risk. If you don't want to take that risk, we advise you to go see a lawyer, go see an attorney. And they will always say, they often say, I don't have a lawyer. I don't like lawyers. Lawyers are cheats. No, they're not. Sometimes they are a little shady, but sometimes pastors are a little shady. I'm just saying to you. So most attorneys are reputable and ethical people. And if you don't have a lawyer, if you live in a certain part of Texas and you ask me for a recommendation, I'll say, well, I can't recommend one because if you don't like it, you'll be mad at me, not at the lawyer. But here's a list of attorneys that folks that I know have used and they've been pleased. Call them on the phone. Pick up the phone. Call them. Talk to them for 10 minutes. What do you do? What kind of will? I'm a simple guy. I got this estate. I don't need a $4,000 will. What do you charge? Can I come see you and talk to you? Does that cost all that? Interview those folks on the phone, and you'll find one that you really like better than the others, and go to that one and get it done. Last will and testament. Number 4, life insurance. That's an easy way to make leveraged gifts. You make some life insurance premium payments during your lifetime. Sometimes your single premium, you put a bunch of money in the insurance policy and it's all paid up, or you pay $20.67 a month. Not a month, but a quarter. Each quarter. That's $82 a year for a $10,000 life insurance policy, depending on your age when you get it. And when you die, it's worth $10,000 or $25,000 or $500,000, depending on how much premium you put in the policy. That's a way to leverage money. And it gives the opportunity to give more money to family or to give more money to your church, because you can give a life insurance policy to your favorite charity. It's a great way to make a bigger gift than otherwise you'd be able to make. What are the benefits of those gift planning tools? Revocable and amendable throughout your lifetime. If you spend the money, that are in the accounts, the 401k or IRA accounts, 100% of nothing is nothing. But that's your money as long as you live. So you can spend it if you need it, and you can change it if you need to, want to. Allows continuity of ownership, use, and expenditure of assets throughout your lifetime. That's another way of saying the same thing as the first one says. You can control that money, you can spend it any way you want to. Allows percentage gifts, more flexible for donors' life situations and circumstances. If your beneficiary designation says, I want to leave $100,000 to this person, $100,000 to this person, $100,000 to this person, and you start with $300,000, but by the time you die, you've only got $100,000. Well, you don't have $300,000 to give anymore. So if you say, I want 33% to go to each of these three people, then 33% of whatever's the balance, that's what goes to each of those people. Make sense? Provides potential estate tax savings if your estate is high enough to perhaps pull estate taxes. Here's an idea. You can include your church or other charity along with your children or other heirs. I know a guy who's got 3 kids, and he's divided his estate into 4 portions. His church gets 1/4, and the kids each get 1/4 as well. That's just an idea. Other gift planning tools. Charitable remainder trusts. I promised I'd say more about those a while ago. A charitable trust is like a basket. That's what this is a small picture, but that's a basket right there. Here's the donor. Initial transfer, he puts money in the basket. The basket is managed not by him, but by a trustee in a charitable remainder trust. The payments that are generated by investing the assets in the basket, the trustee invests those assets, the payments go back to the donor. For how long? During the lifetime of the donor. If there's 2 donors, how long do those payments go back? For 2 lifetimes, husband and wife. What's the payment? It's a percentage of what's in the basket. And that fluctuates with the investment returns, the proceeds of the investment by the trustee. It can go up a little bit or down a little bit. But basically, it's in the neighborhood of 5% a year for the lifetime of the donor. When the donor or donors are dead and gone, then what's left in the basket goes to a charity. That's a planned gift. That's a deferred gift that pays people while they're still living, even after they make the gift. And there's some wonderful benefits, some tax benefits, if what goes in the basket is an appreciated asset like stocks or bonds or even real estate. When they are sold by the trustee, they're transferred to the basket intact. The donor doesn't sell them first. If the donor sells them first, the donor has to pay the capital gains tax. Capital gains tax, if you pay this much and you sell it for this much, the difference between here and there, that's the capital gain, the gain in capital. And you have to pay a tax on that, anywhere from 15 to 30%, something like that. But if you put the asset, transfer the asset to the basket, you sell it for this amount, the trustee sells it for this amount, because it's going to be a charitable gift someday, it's going to that charity someday, Uncle Sam says, you don't have to pay the capital gains tax. Really, your Amazon stock that once was worth $1 zillion, now it's worth only $500 million. You have had some appreciation in your Amazon stock. You could sell that stock, you could sell it and pay the capital gains and invest or spend the remainder, but you can also put that in a charitable remainder trust and not pay the capital gains and have the whole amount working for you for your lifetime, for your spouse's lifetime, and this chart doesn't show it, but you can add on to the donor's lifetimes some years for your family after you and your spouse are dead and gone. How many years? Up to 20 years. So get this. After you're dead and gone, you've been receiving 5%, your spouse has been receiving 5% for the rest of your life, which is actuarially determined. In my case, I'm 80 years old. I think the actuaries will say that I'm going to live another 14 years or something. How the heck do they know? Well, they've got charts. They got computer programs that figure that out. If you made it this far, you're going to make it a little bit farther. Whatever it is, they'll calculate that, and then you add 20 years onto that. So 5% of a bucket of money over 20 years plus another 20 years is a lot of money. And what's in the basket in the first place goes to the charity. It's such a sweet, stinking deal. That's a charitable trust, and there are variations on that theme. That's the basic concept. Charitable gift annuity is pretty similar. It's a different graphic, but it's too small for even me to read. Basically, it does the same thing, except that it goes for the lifetime of the donor and the donor's spouse. It can be a couple, but it will not go farther than the death of the donor or the donor's spouse. It won't go to children. Plus, this is a fixed payment. It's fixed at the time the gift annuity is created, and it's based on a table that is connected to the date of birth of the people who start the charitable gift annuity. The older you are, the higher the rate. A gift annuity generally is in the high 5% range, goes up to about over 8%, guaranteed for life. Ruth is a lady who started 3 charitable gift annuities with our foundation years ago. Ruth died at 104. She did not die on time. And because a charitable gift annuity is a legal contract between us and the donor, we had a legal, moral, and ethical responsibility to pay her what was guaranteed for her for the rest of her life. So we had to dig into our pockets to pull out some money to pay Ruth the amount that the charitable gift annuity called for, to the extent that we had already given back all the money she put into the annuity. Now we were paying out of our pockets because we made that promise. I preached at Ruth's congregation just last Sunday, and Ruth died a couple of years ago at the tender age of 104 years of age. So that's what a charitable gift annuity does. Most people die more nearly on time. So there's something left in the basket that goes to the charity that it's designed to support in the first place. Donor advised funds, that's a cool way to make a gift. Illustration, our church had a building program, a capital campaign several years ago. Terry and I made for us, pretty big commitment. And we gave 40% of that commitment the first year because the program was rocking along. All of a sudden it hit the brakes because there was a big conflict in our church. Some of the folks who'd been there a while didn't want to expand the sanctuary. There's nothing wrong with the sanctuary now. Leave the stinking sanctuary alone. So over a period of a couple of years, we finally got to the point as a congregation to agree we'll leave the sanctuary alone, but we'll build a separate building. But in that period of time, I said to Terry, honey, I don't think I want to pay the rest of the 60% of our pledge, because if this thing goes south and no building is built, I don't want 100% of our big pledge sitting there in a bank account. We can put that money to work somewhere else and pay it when it's time, when the church gets its act together, which it did. But in the meantime, we put the remaining 60% in a donor-advised fund. It's legally a trust. Our foundation is a trustee. So we wrote the check for the rest of the money, put it in a donor-advised fund. Legacy Dale invested that money. It grew. It was before, the stock market went down. It grew. And finally, when the congregation got its act together and decided what to do for that building program, started the construction of the new building, I said to Legacy Dale, would you please write a check for this amount, the remaining amount of our pledge, send it to Zion Lutheran Church? So that's what happened. Now, in the meantime, the year that we put the money in the donor advised fund, how did that help us? We deducted the full amount because it was a charitable gift to a charitable organization. We gave it to Legacy Dale in trust. So we got to deduct the whole amount. That saved our taxes. We gave cash. We did not give appreciated assets, but we could have. It would have been a little different deal with appreciated assets because the government looks at that a little different if it goes to a donor advised fund. So that's what a donor advised fund does. It's helpful when people have a windfall. If they get an inheritance, a bonus, extra money that they find on the street, and all of a sudden they got some money and they don't know what to do with it, but they have charitable heart, they can start a donor advised fund. Take the tax benefits now, make the gift now, but decide later on, whenever you want, what charity you finally want to receive that money. It's a very flexible way of making gifts. Endowment funds, that's a perpetual fund. that started, and it's intended to last until Jesus comes again. And it supports ministries that are selected by the donor. The trustee manages those assets, invests them, does all the filing and reporting and distribution, keeps the donor advised about how many dollars were gained this year, how many dollars were distributed this year, that sort of business. It's a way to make gifts last a long, long time. So, Jay, why don't you come up here? Jay will tell you his story, the story that he's working with a particular young lady. If you want to advance the slides, hit that one down there. To return them, hit that one. To do that one right there, that's the laser pointer.
Sounds good.
So he'll tell you something that he came up with, which is very, very helpful in a practical way. Jay, here's Jay Brown. Jay,
Thank you. Yeah, one of the things we do when we work with not just organizations, figuring out how we can help them increase their income with monies donated to them, but also working with individuals and doing estate planning, is we sit down with them and we'll do a inventory and consultation. This one lady that I was working with, kind of an interesting story, she had no idea what she even had. We sat down and started listing all of her accounts and so forth. And she got to the point where she looked at me and she said, "Do you mean I'm a millionaire?" I said, "Yes, you're a millionaire. And what does that mean for your organization, for your church, for your school?" Well, now this lady feels more comfortable giving more because she realizes all that she has. Okay? And she realized at that point that she's not going to run out of money, that she can be a little more generous, not having to hold as much back for her own day-to-day expenses. So this estate planning, inventory, and consultation is important. One of the things we do is we sit down and we ask also, too, how it is that they want to distribute some of their gifts, their possessions now in their lifetime. This one lady I'm working with, she said that her mom taught her that it's always better to give with warm hands when possible. I thought that was kind of a neat way to put it, give with warm hands. And as we talked about it, she was also excited about the fact that she could sit there across from the table from some of these people that were going to receive gifts that she wanted to give and see the smile on their face and maybe even receive a nice, big hug from them on the spot rather than her putting her gifts, into her will and planning them that way. You have to decide what you want to give. You decide how much you want to give, to what organizations you want to give them. Supporting whatever organizations, Legacy Deo is fine. Wherever it is that you want to give your money, we do think that probably you want to remember your home congregation in there somewhere. Who will serve as your executor? As we sit down and go through this planning process too, there's a lot of questions. Maybe some things that you haven't thought of before. Who's going to serve as your executor, and who's going to serve as the backup executor if your executor is not able or willing at some point in time to fulfill those duties to take care of managing your estate. Figuring out who you want to be your durable health care power of attorney and also your power of attorney for finance. If maybe it is that I'm still alive and I were to be in a car accident, I don't know, and I'm laying there in the hospital and I can't make my own medical decisions, who's going to step in and make those medical decisions for you? And so maybe you've got somebody in mind, maybe you've got a close family member, maybe your family members aren't the right people to make those decisions. And Legacy Deo can help out in these areas too. The same thing with finance. Who's going to step in while you're in that, that state in the hospital where you can't pay your bills and so forth, and write the checks to make sure your electric doesn't get cut off and such. List any personal possessions to be estate gifts. So maybe there are possessions, things that you want to give away that are not going to be given immediately during your lifetime, but included with your estate. Those would be possibly listed in your will, but if you don't want to change that will back and forth and so forth, you can also list those things separate on a piece of paper and have them then, have it there with your will to be distributed later. And again, write those in your own handwriting. Don't type them out. That's important. And list your desires and your directions for finance and healthcare, power of attorney. Sit down and have a conversation with your family. It's so important that they know too what your desire is. You don't want there to be any surprises down the road. Your kids all of a sudden, wait a minute, I had no idea maybe that wasn't really mom's intention and so forth, or there's some ambiguity or some confusion in the language. Sit down, talk with them, maybe go through your estate plan once a year with your kids or your heirs and so forth to help ensure that there's no friction at the end. Everybody knows your plan and everybody's on board. Well, it's your plan. They don't have to be on board, but they have to understand what your wishes are. They don't have to give their consent. All right. And then what is the rest, residue, and remainder of your estate after those distributions are taken care of by your executor? All of your wishes are carried out. Your possessions are given to those that you designate. And what's going to happen to the remainder of it? It'd be wonderful if you designate a portion of that to your favorite charity, maybe your church, wherever it is that your heart tells you that you want to give, as well as giving a portion to your family. We don't come in here and say that we only want you to give everything to charity. We think that it's both faith and family, right? It's your loved ones and the Lord that you want to remember in your estate plans. To whom would you like to leave the rest, residue, and remainder of your estate? You can leave it to individuals, and you can leave it to organizations. That's important to remember too. What is probate? All of those items that are left in your will that did not pass by direct beneficiary designation then would have to go through the court process. And certainly you want to have a will that is very clear and concise to make sure that that doesn't take a lot of extra time and require a lot of extra attorney's fees and so forth. And again, you want to be clear with your family so they know what's going on so that the will is not as easily or as likely to be contested. That would be, then your estate gets eaten up with all that process and the fees and so forth too as it goes through probate in the court system. Power beneficiary designations affected by probate. We already mentioned that they go directly to the individual and they don't go through probate, so that's a good thing. Have your direct and your primary beneficiary picked out, but then also have a secondary beneficiary. What happens if something happens to that primary beneficiary? And boy, oh boy, it's so important that periodically you go back and review those things because your situation changes over time, the relationships change over time. Maybe you change your church membership. Maybe it is that now you recognize that you want to give to a charity B, C, and D as well as A. So you review all those accounts and what it is that your will is and your total overall estate plan. That's some of the things that we can do at Legacy Deo with you too. Sit down and kind of walk beside you as you look at what some of the options are, what it is that you'd like to do. We don't give you that legal advice, but we'll give you a lot of good ideas and things to consider so you can take them to your own estate planning attorney and your own CPA to figure out exactly how it is that you want to carry these things out. This lady, one other, and I'll finish with that story. One lady that I've been working with, she and her husband were so generous, just wonderful, that they wanted to give a gift to their church of $30,000. Right? And great, right? Thank you very much. You want to give a gift to this charity for $30,000. She had no idea how endowments worked. Once she found out about endowments, once we sat down with her, did an estate planning inventory and such, and told her about some of her options, and she realized that she was more than a millionaire at the time, and she could give a little bit more. She realized how endowments work, that they come with some guardrails. She did not want to give them all to her church at one time in one lump sum. Her daddy, she said, taught her that money makes money, and so that she wanted to see the money invested over time, and that her church to be supported then throughout all of perpetuity until the Lord comes home. What she found out about that, she changed, or has the desire to. We're working with her right now to update her will, and still in the process of doing that, is updating her will so that now her home congregation is not receiving $30,000 as a benefit when she is deceased, but instead now she's going to give that church a $1.5 million gift inside that endowment that will benefit that congregation forever. Right? And so if you've got an organization or some people that you know that might benefit from some of the work that we do, to sit down with folks, walk beside them in these circumstances, in these cases, let us know. We'd be glad to help.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate that very much. The lady that Jay is working with is 90 years of age, and she is still sharp as a tack, and so thankful for the ministry that Jay has provided for her. We're just about the end here. Next steps, what are some things that you could advise your people, or that you could do as well if you still need some work done in your estate plan? Number one, make an accessible list of all your assets, passwords, etc. Accessible to whom? Especially to your executor, but I think it's very important if you have a spouse, let your spouse know where that list is. Better yet, work with your spouse to create that list, because your spouse may know some assets that you don't even know about. Number two, decide what to leave for your family in favor of charitable causes. If you make these decisions and get this stuff done before, if you have an attorney or you go to an attorney for a will, you're ready to go. You hear the answers to the questions that the attorney is going to ask you, because those are the questions that Jay just went through. That's the questions that the attorney is going to be wanting to know from you. Consult with your financial advisor or wealth planner for advice and counsel. It's always a good thing to do. Take simple steps not requiring legal help, like the beneficiary designation. Can't emphasize that enough. That's a huge, huge step in estate planning that you can do on your own without legal help. Finalize and formalize your plans with an attorney of your choice, especially if you're going to do a last will and testament. And call Legacy Dale for assistance, support, coaching, specialized service. We're here to help. So we have some brochures actually over there on the table or the desk where Jay is standing. This brochure, How Can I Benefit from a Planned Gift? It outlines the planned gifts that I've already shared with you, and it indicates what kind of asset would be ideal to use to make this gift. It indicates what the benefits would be to you for making that gift. The second one, the green brochure, is a general brochure describing Legacy Deo, our history, our ministry. The third one is what most of this presentation was. Again, a review of the 7 estate planning myths. Those are available back there now. They're also available, I think they're available electronically on our website, but we've got them here for you. These 3 items also are available on the website. Here's a wills planning guide. The red book, that it's not really red, it's electronic, but it's a form that you can fill out on the computer, so you don't have to hand scratch stuff. You can type stuff in, and that's where you get a list of all your assets and all the account numbers and places to contact. And then finally, the funeral planning guide. It walks through lots of questions that people would need to ask about when you plan your funeral. For example, the cremation or burial question needs to be in your funeral planning guide, so there's no question about it. Who do you want to be the preacher at your funeral? Are you going to have a funeral? If so, at the church or at the funeral home? At the burial site? Well, what's your obituary? Who's going to write your obituary? Who knows better than you what you've done with your life? It's an exercise in humility to write one's own obituary, or to have your spouse write it for you, or your kids write it for you. You have to. That's a sensitive issue with families, but it'd be great to have at least an outline of the obituary, so whoever's going to finalize it doesn't have to start from scratch and figure it out. We have some cards back there also. They may have the wrong address because we just moved recently to that new address, but they will find us. If you want to fill out a card, gives you an opportunity to request information. That's all you'll get. Whatever you check, that's what we'll get. We're not going to sell your name or I get so ticked off every stinking day I get a new advertisement on email from some financial company. I did not ask for that, but we just keep that in our own file. Nobody else sees that but us. It's proprietary information. And this is the way you can get in touch with both or either one of us. We will hang around for questions if you have specific questions that you'd like to ask. There are people like the man standing back in the back. Craig Mellendorf is that guy's name. He owns and operates a business that works with charities to help people who are constituents of that charity go through the process step by step, planning their estate. There are other people here to help out. Anything we can do to help you is what we're here to do. Remember, Legacy Deo, God's gifts to you and your legacy back to God. Thank you for your time and kind attention. Good to be with you.